Hey guys, it's Lamont from Bashers United. It's the video that I always said I was going to make, and now I'm making it. So let's get right to it. Alright, so this car is not complete. This is my Tres-Ray Kodo HT1. It's a 1/10 scale on-road. Most of the stuff I will tell you will transfer to 1/8 scale and 1/5 scale, because this is just about like what to do with your shocks, how to set your droop, and how to set up the car. Now, there's going to be a second video on how to cut your body properly and set that part up. Here's the skinny, right? You don't need to add anything to your chassis, right? You don't need to add a back draft plate. You don't need to add, I mean, if anything, you could run a front what is it, a front scoop or whatever to call that thing with a little piece that runs here. Those work. Anything back here, not going to do you any good. The best thing you can do with your body is just cut the back of it out. What that does is it creates a vacuum at the back of the car. If you think about the air moving over the car like this, in this direction, as it passes the rear, it creates a vortex. That vortex sucks, creates a vacuum back here, sucking the air out from underneath the chassis and giving you a bit of a suction of the car to the ground. If you don't do that, you're depending solely on the aerodynamics of the car, and that could end badly. So that's that. If you take nothing else away from this video, you got that part. You could leave now. Just kidding, don't leave. Okay. All right. So the way that I set my cars up, I have an example here. You don't want a lot of travel in your shocks, front or rear. Right? You can use a little bit, but none of that's going to do you any good. Like, if you hit a bump at 100 miles an hour, your car's going to flip. Like, that's just the way it's going to go. Sometimes, if you have enough downforce, you can go into a manhole dip and then out of a manhole dip and still make it. But for the most part, you need to make sure that your running area is clear of debris. That is your enemy. It's never going to help you. It's always going to hurt you. So I use shock travel limiters. These are made by, what's that company? They make all the plastic parts for all the vehicles. They're really durable. I'll put the name on the screen around here somewhere. So these are shock travel limiters, right? Basically, you clip them to the shock rod here, right there, right? And they limit the travel of the shock, right? On my front, I usually have just a little bit of travel in the front so that the car can settle in with the downforce. But for the most part, let's move that away so we get a clear shot here. But for the most part, I stiffen up the shock almost completely. If you can see in the rear of this car, there is no drop at all. The rear suspension is locked. I'm also using a rear spool. On 10 scales, on anything, a spool is good if you want all the power all the time. Using a diff, like the reason the diff is there is so that when one of the wheels leaves the ground, this wheel doesn't spin the car out. This wheel leaves the ground and it relieves some of the pressure on this wheel by overspinning this wheel. Now, if you're using GRPs, that is a terrible thing, right? You don't want that to happen. You want all the wheels to spin at the same rate. I mean, the problem is if you're already doing over like $1.25 and one of your wheels leaves the ground, you're probably going to lose that GRP. Foams, they usually hold together for a while after that, at least on a 10 scale. I know that it was a Banana Skins Racing. Those hold up pretty good, but you're still going to have the problem is like, if you're using diffs, that is, if you're not using a lock or a spool like I'm using, if you're using a diff, basically the one wheel leaves the ground. If you're not running like 100K or higher diff oil, this wheel is going to spin at way over 100 miles an hour. Basically, all the power is going to swap out, go to this wheel that's off the ground, and that GRP is coming loose. It's just gone. And your car starts flipping, or you slide out and hit the curb. Nobody likes it. All right, that's a quick note. I'm just kind of going over this in no specific order, so I suggest you stay to the end. So yeah, I'm using a locker in the rear, no travel, right? I'm using a large, they come in three, like there's three sizes in the pack. This is actually one of the smallest ones. I'm using a large and a small in the rear. Another thing that you need to note is on all cars other than the Traxxas Slash, right? There are these things that are called droop screws. The droop screw is right there. Right? It's a grub screw. It goes straight through the arm, right? The longer it is, the more the arm will be up. So the lower your chassis will be. Yeah, you can do the droop your chassis. Most, if not all, cars, GT cars, 110 scale, nitro, on-roads, all of them have them, right? Except for maybe 1/8 scale on-road, which is like your Serpent 977s and stuff like that. They have a different system. Right-hand turn means make the chassis lower. Left-hand turn means make it higher, right? What I do is I combine the droop with the spring stop to create a locked suspension travel, right? So in the front, you want your chassis to be higher in the rear than it is in the front. I go about, let's say, 3-4 millimeters difference. So 3-4 millimeters higher in the back than the front. Right now, I'm trying a softer suspension in the front so that the front settles in before the rear. The rear is never going to settle in because it's locked. Most seasons, I have locked the front as well. Because what you don't want to have happen is the downforce to increase so much that the chassis touches the ground in the front. Because you lose traction in your front wheels and you lose control, basically. Well, sometimes you lose control. You're just gonna you lose speed because you're dragging the chassis on the ground. So that's another part of it. So quick recap. Make sure you use shock travel limiters in your shocks. Focus. Shock travel limiters in your shocks to control the shock travel. Lock it if you can. If you want a little travel in there, just in case you got a slightly bumpy road, or the road is not super smooth. Where we run at Run DMV, the road is very, very smooth. It's like the gray asphalt, not the black asphalt. The black has larger rock gaps in it, whereas the gray has it's really fine. It's almost like a glass surface, very smooth. So for the very smooth surface, I run no travel. For like a rougher surface, I run like maybe 3-4 millimeters of travel. That's a little bit much, maybe 2 millimeters travel in my shock, right? I also use the highest pound rating on my springs. It isn't that important if you're going to lock your suspension. Here we go. It isn't that important if you're going to lock the travel altogether. So the springs they're negated because you're not going to be using any sort of. Don't go too high, maybe like 25 pounds, because if you go over 25 pounds, what will happen if you go over 25 pounds and you're still using travel, the shocks become bouncy. It doesn't matter how viscous your shock fluid is. There's not enough travel to create enough pack inside of the shock. Pack is basically there's a disc in there that travels inside of the shock body, and the thicker the liquid, the harder is that disc to move around inside the shaft, inside the body, shock body. So you should use the around 25 to 30 pound springs. 30 is probably a little too high, so say about 22 to 25 pound springs on a 10 scale car. On an 8 scale car, you should go as high as you possibly can. If you get on my 8 scale cars, I lock the whole suspension. There's no travel in the front, no travel in the rear. It's just straight locked, and that's how I roll. But if you're on 10 scale, you kind of mess around with it. Don't go too high because it makes the car bounce. It's all shock, spring, and no inner shock dampening, right? And you don't want that. You don't want bouncing. Bouncing makes your car leave the ground, and that's what we're trying not to do. All right, what else? We went over The rear should be higher. The rear should be higher than the front. In most cases, 8 scale, 10 scale, 5th scale, you want to lock that rear, because what's going to happen is, as you put on throttle, the rear is going to want to sink if you have travel in your shocks. If the rear sinks lower than the front, you're basically, your body, the front of your body is going to lift up off the ground. You're going to get air under your chassis. It's going to go flipping, right? If you keep it so that the rear is higher than the front, lock the suspension, make sure that nothing happens hard. Like, you can like drop the throttle like hard, and the car won't. I mean, it'll probably backflip, but if you know what you're doing, drop the throttle hard, and the car won't dip in the rear and raise in the front. All right, so that's that. For toe in on my rear, this is I think a half degree toe in the rear and a half degree toe out in the front. Just when I first set the car up, if I feel like it's too like jittery when I'm driving it, I'll add toe out to the front. I don't add any more toe in to the rear. But for the most part, that's it, guys. Just remember to keep the rear higher than the front on setup. Lock the rear, because you don't want to get on throttle and have your rear dip. That's bad news bears. Like, I've seen a bunch of guys do it at Run DMV. You know, even our fastest guys. I've seen Junior's car. Junior will get on throttle toward the end of the run, and it's a teeter-totter. Like, the rear will sink, and the nose will come up. It's like, ooh. But yeah, and that's pretty much how it happens pretty much every time somebody flips a car at the event. The rear sinks, because what happens is, at least at a trap event, when you're running by yourself and you're running GPS, it just doesn't really happen that much, because you're just rolling on the throttle. You don't have to worry about a target where you need to hit your highest speed, like through the traps. So people get close to the traps, they figure they got a quarter throttle left, and they just dump it. The rear end drops, the front end raises, the car goes flying. So if you lock the rear, you lessen the chance of that from happening. What will more likely happen is you lose traction. I've had that happen. Like, I think the first event, if you guys saw me, when I wrecked my GTP2E, that's what happened. I got on throttle. The car didn't leave the ground, but I lost all traction. So that's a second point. But that's it, guys. That's the setup video. Not too long. Very simple. Lock the rear higher. Keep the rear higher than the front. I use shock travel limiters. God, what is the name of that dang company? I can never remember the name of them. I don't know. I'll put it up on the screen just like before. It's like they make plastic arms for the Slash that are like indestructible. I can't remember the name of them right now, but you know what I'm talking about. They make these. There are other companies that make shock travel limiters. They're called shock travel limiters. You can go to Amazon. You can buy them there. You can go to eBay, buy them there. You can go to Tower Hobby. I think they have them at Hero Hobbies. That used to be Bruckner Hobbies. I think he's got them there. You can pretty much get them anywhere. They're all over the place. So use those. And happy running out there, guys. The season's almost upon us. We're going to get started in May. May 7th is that we're going to shoot for the May 7th. Same spot, same bat channel. All right, guys. Hope that helped. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And maybe before the body video, I'll do a Q&A. Any questions you have, I'll try to answer them with the next video or the opener of the body setup video. And we'll go from there. Deuces, guys. Keep those cars on the ground. Stay safe out there. And get that speed. Deuces.